Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch podcast, where we talk to the boldest leaders, the sharpest minds, and the real world rainmakers in business today. And speaking of rainmakers, today's guest is a sales powerhouse who's practically redefined what it means to lead with purpose and performance. I'm talking about Sara McLenighan, an executive sales leader with 10 President's Club honors, success across the US and Canada, and a reputation for building elite sales teams that don't just meet goals, they obliterate them. She scaled national organizations, launched disruptive technologies in complex therapeutic markets, and created cultures where accountability, innovation, and talent thrive. Strategic? Absolutely. Data driven? Always. Engaging and empowering? Without a doubt. If you've ever wondered how to drive revenue, inspire teams, and lead with impact, Sara's playbook is one you're going to want to steal from. So let's dive in and learn how she does it all with heart, hustle, and a whole lot of strategy. I always know when I'm dealing with a strong sales leader, when past employees don't just want to work for her again, they run wherever she's going. Sara, welcome to the Chase MedSearch podcast.
Wow, Jordan, what an incredibly kind introduction. I'm honored and humbled. And, I've been fortunate to work alongside some truly amazing people over the years. And if anything, that intro holds true really because it's the caliber of the teams that I've had the privilege to lead. And I'm grateful for every chapter, every challenge, and every opportunity to grow. And I'm genuinely excited to be here today. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's a joy to have you on. I've had the honor of working with you in the past, obviously filling positions. But then, because of the nature of the work that I do, I run into past employees of yours who know you and have worked for you before and want to work for you again. And your reputation just is so excellent. You got to know that. And it's just fun to have you on because I enjoyed working with you so much too. If your career had a movie title, what would it be and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. I would say no instructions included grit and grace because my career, like leadership, didn't come with an instruction manual, right? I had to figure it out in motion. You have to stay humble, get scrappy, have intestinal fortitude, and ultimately believe in myself and lead with grit and grace through every chapter, especially the unplanned ones, because there's a lot of those, right? And I didn't wait for directions. I
Yeah.
owned my own story so I could ultimately write the ending.
I love that. Grit and grace. That's fantastic. Let's talk about 10 President's Clubs. That is an unprecedented level of success for most people in their career. They're very grateful if they get one, if they get two. You earn 10. That's extraordinary, and it doesn't happen for everybody. What separates top performers from the rest of the folks in sales who also are trying hard?
Yeah, for sure. I think it comes down to mindset because the top 1%, Jordan, aren't driven by quotas. They're really fueled by purpose, preparation, and a relentless commitment to solving problems that really matter to the customers. That's what it's all about. They anticipate more, they practice harder, and they operate at a level where excellence isn't occasional, it's ultimately expected. I think that whether it was myself or any of my top performers, they really outlearn the competition. They're out listening in the field and they're out executing really, especially when they're under pressure. They're not reactive, they're proactive. They make time for the things that others are skipping, right? And most of all, they take extreme ownership. Their philosophy always, as is mine, is if it's to be, it's up to me. So they're focused, they're resilient, and they're consistent, and not just when it's easy, also when it's tough. And it's tough more than it's easy, right? So because talent might open the door, but it's ultimately the execution that's going to keep them or myself at the top of our game.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, and I know we will over the course of this conversation get into some of that because we're going to talk about hiring down the road here in a little bit.
You
Because I
bet.
want to know, and I know my audience wants to know how you identify those folks. But even before that, your career has gone so many places, so many niches, so many directions. Has it had a defining moment that entirely changed the trajectory for you? If it was, what was it?
I would say the most defining moments of my career came during my tenure at Medtronic, when I was asked to step in as interim vice president, leading an entire region and area while still maintaining one of the largest districts in the country. And for an extended period of time, I did both roles simultaneously, and it wasn't in maintenance mode, it was full throttle for a very long period of time. And we were navigating change, driving really aggressive growth goals, and leading complex teams through a lot of different shifting market dynamics. So it was a true stretch assignment in every sense of the word. And I had to elevate my strategic lens for the region without really losing that operational and cultural heartbeat of the district. So there were really long days, tough calls, and moments where there was no playbook that existed. And in the midst of all that, I was honored to earn a President's Club. And I would say that experience taught me a few things that I personally won't ever forget. First of all, capacity is built, it's not inherited, because somebody could have done something one way before, but I learned I was capable of more than I imagined. And once I stopped trying to keep and make everything perfect, I started trusting my people in the process. And that's really, really important. Next, I would say that leadership is about replication and not control. So I had to empower the leaders beneath me to own the outcomes and drive the culture without me being at the center of every decision and every detail, because you just don't, frankly, have the capacity for that. And I think finally that the biggest lesson is that excellence and chaos can sometimes coexist, right? So even in the most demanding season of your career, you can keep your standards really high, you can stay connected to a mission, and you can deliver exceptional results. And that period of time didn't just test my leadership, it really expanded it. And it became, I think, a defining proof point that I could lead at the next level without compromising performance, culture, or trust.
That's amazing. So many lessons there. And it sounds like some of the most powerful lessons were ones that you learned for yourself and about yourself through that experience. Would that be accurate?
Absolutely. Absolutely. No question.
Yeah, that's great. You know how to launch disruptive technology very successfully. You've been a part of some amazing journeys in medical device launches, product launches, new product introductions. Tell us about launching disruptive product. What worked? What didn't? What did you learn?
Sure. So launching disruptive technology isn't about necessarily just the innovation, it's about changing customers' behaviors. And that often means challenging the status quo and often going toe to toe with market giants who have had a stronghold for decades. When I left Medtronic, I went to a company that was competing directly against Medtronic, right? So what worked was leading with clinical conviction and ultimately credibility. So you can't just pitch the products, you have to build belief around the therapy and the technology. And you spend time in offices in the OR side by side with the clinicians, the surgeon, asking questions and really understanding the friction that they were currently facing and framing your new technology, your new product, your new therapy, not just as new, but ultimately as necessary. So you build trust and then traction. And you have to identify the early adopters, make them champions, and amplify their voice. Because one physician, one KOL, one surgeon's confidence often creates a ripple effect in the industry and in the community that you're working with. So you focus on outcomes, not just product features. You earn loyalty by showing up differently. You are better prepared, you're more engaged, and you're ultimately more committed. And what didn't work early on was assuming that clinical superiority or having a better mousetrap was automatically going to shift behavior, because it ultimately doesn't do that. You're not just competing with the products, because you're ultimately competing with habits, loyalties, and deeply held philosophies that they've had for a very, very long time. So you have to shift from education to transformation and from data to dialogue. And then you learn that the disruption isn't just about the technology, it's about trust. And convincing a surgeon or a physician to try something new requires credibility, it requires courage, and relentlessly delivering value. And when you do it right, they don't just trial the product or the innovative technology, the disruptive technology, they advocate for it. And that's when you ultimately win.
Yeah, that's great. You know, in such a fast moving, fast paced, high growth market, you know, there's always a challenge of keeping your teams agile, but also aligned with a bigger vision. How challenging is that, and what have you found to be successful ways of doing that? Because in startups, things are moving so fast, they're moving around. Direction, strategy seems to change by the minute as everybody's learning together collectively. How do you keep them
Totally
aligned?
agree. Yeah, I think it's really about the clarity and the cadence. So, you have to anchor your teams in purpose and priorities, simplifying the mission and what you ultimately want to achieve. And then you have to really establish tight communication rhythms. So, you talk about wins early and often, you talk about losses early and often, and then learnings weekly. So, pivots are fast, but they're always aligned to the objective. And leadership is always about having that compelling vision, the comprehensive plan, and then relentless implementation and talented teams working together in sync. And so it always goes back to the clarity and the cadence of communication.
Yeah, that's great. What drew you into medical devices in the first place? Why you were already having a very successful career doing something else in another healthcare niche. What was the draw to go into
Yeah, I think
device?
it's the impact that you can make, and you can work an entire lifetime and never touch lives the way that this field enables you to do. So I saw what technology did for patients, and I was in. That's a game changer. You just you're wowed by the opportunity. You're humbled, but it's just so impactful and so important that the work that we're doing. And I've really never looked back. It was the intersection that really captured me, I would say, because there's this rare blend of working with brilliant clinical minds, advancing cutting edge technology and therapies, and making a direct impact on patient lives. And I would say few industries really demand that level of intellectual challenge and stimulation, sort of the pace of innovation that happens in the medical device world. And then, you couple that with the purpose driven outcome all at once. So that combination isn't just compelling, it's super meaningful. And from day one, I knew I was part of something that ultimately really mattered. And that sense of
Mhm.
alignment between science, strategy, and then the human outcome has really kept me in the field ever since.
Yeah, that's terrific. You have created great followership. I mentioned that early on here in our little talk. What do you think that people experience working for you that continues to draw them back to want to do it again and say, I want to go back and work for Sarah again?
Well, I appreciate that because obviously your reputation always precedes you. I would say, when you build a great team, that's when the magic happens. And I believe that former employees have chosen to work with me again because they experience a culture grounded in trust, high standards, and mutual respect. That's so important. And I really try to lead with clarity and consistency and investing deeply in both the business outcomes, but also the individuals delivering them because it's all about the people, it's all about the team. And anyone that's ever worked for me knows I will challenge them, but I'm also going to support them and be present when it matters most. I never ask anybody on my team to do something that I wouldn't do. And, they've seen, I believe, that performance never came at the expense of integrity and doing the right thing, and that the wins are always shared. You always celebrate the wins. I hope that anyone that's worked for me knows that while the bar is always really high, the energy is real. It's tangible,
Mhm.
and you celebrate big, and we laugh often. The work's super meaningful, but the experience is even more memorable. And people don't just thrive in that environment; they really enjoy it. And that combination is super rare, and I believe it what hopefully keeps them coming back. So when I say, "Hey, let's get the band back together again," they say, "I'm in."
That's great. You hire really well, particularly well. What is it you're looking for when you're looking to build an elite sales team?
Well, Jordan, you know this, but you can usually feel the first 5 to 10 minutes of an interview if this is someone, as the old adage says, would I want to spend a full day in the field with this person, right? And that connection, that energy is real. It's palpable, and that question, kind of cuts through the polish and the panache of someone interviewing it, and it goes a little bit deeper. Is there authenticity, that connection, that presence? I'm looking for emotional intelligence and relatability. So someone who can navigate the nuance of customer conversations, read a room, and build trust quickly. So those are really the fundamentals. The hard skills like, strategic territory management, building your own franchise, clinical fluency, consistent quota achievement are important, and so are the soft skills, self-awareness, adaptability, coachability. I think they both matter equally. And then there's always the track record, because it's not just about the big wins or any of the wins, but it's how did they earn those, and did they build something, did they turn something around, did they elevate those around them? I want to know their story, not just their stats. And ultimately, I'm building teams that are reflecting more than just their capabilities, they reflect character. And I want to always hire people that raise the standard, that protect the culture. Are they going to fit in, and are they going to thrive in the environment where expectations are high? And that's
Mhm.
ultimately what I think is your, deciding factor.
Absolutely. Before we started the podcast, we were talking about one of those exceptional hires you've had in the past and mentored and all that. What, in any situation where you hire and build a team, there's always going to be some that stand out even more than the rest. What's your approach to coaching or mentoring rising stars on your team?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you manage everybody a little bit differently and you meet them where they're at. But, every high performer, I believe, really needs three fundamental things to thrive. They need truth consistently, they need trust, and they need trajectory. So I really give them unfiltered feedback, not to critique, because everyone has blind spots, but really to equip them. And I don't soften the truth. I always deliver it in service of their growth, because that's really fundamental and important. And I think the second piece is providing what I call strategic air cover, because you've got to clear the barriers so that they can be successful. And you also need to advocate for them behind the scenes. So you're giving them space to stretch without the fear of failure being fatal to their progress. And I would say, probably even more importantly, I focus on the person behind the performance. So you need to tailor development to who these people are. What are their motivators? What are their strengths? What are ultimately their career and professional aspirations? I want them to be seen themselves as a leader before that title is official. And that means pushing them into stretch opportunities, which I've gotten the amazing, good fortune of having myself, and inviting them into high level conversations and helping them build that executive presence and judgment that they'll need for the next level. And I believe great leaders are revealed long before they're promoted. And so my role is to create conditions where that potential can emerge and ultimately accelerate.
Hmm. You're so good at sales. You've had a lot of success in sales. You've helped others have success in sales. How did you first know that you even wanted to be into sales?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think it was instinct. My number one strength finder is woo, winning others over. So I think it tracks that I've always been energized by connection with people, and I'm curious about them. I'm quick to build rapport. And I think naturally that I have this inclination to sort of lead through influence. But beyond the people side, what ultimately drew me to sales was the clarity. There are really defined goals, there are clear expectations, and there are measurable outcomes. So you don't have to guess what success looks like. There's a scoreboard, you show up, you deliver, you light it up, and the results speak for themselves. And I think personally for me, that transparency, the accountability, that always really resonated with me. And I liked knowing that my effort, the preparation, and the execution moved the needle, and that performance was visible, not theoretical. And sales gave me a lane to compete, connect, and contribute in a way that felt both authentic to me and results driven. It just made sense, and it really still does.
That's great. What was your first sales job?
Sales role was with a Fortune 500 company in the consumer product space. It was gritty, it was super unglamorous, but it was foundational and just building my expertise and experience. So I was calling on high volume accounts and figuring out how to earn trust fast. And the job taught me humility and hustle. I learned to handle rejection and work ethic that matters in a big way, and learned early on that you have to fail fast, course correct, and find a way to win if you want to stand out in the crowd. So my first medical sales role was with Beringer Mannheim, which later became Roche Diagnostics. And that's where everything really kind of leveled up for me, I would say. The company invested heavily in sales excellence. It was some of the best training that I've ever received, which is so critical and important. And, we went through premier speaking training and rigorous role plays, which nobody likes, but they absolutely make you better, and sharpen your clinical storytelling, your objection handling, and consultative selling, which is so crucial for success. And it ultimately gave me the confidence and capability to compete at a higher level and win. And those early roles didn't just build my skills, they really shaped my standards for sales excellence.
Yeah, that's great. Medical devices is hard to break into in a sales role. Was it hard for you? And tell us about that process, how you got in.
Yeah, it wasn't easy, but I think that's what made it all worthwhile. So I had that proven sales track record working for a consumer products company, but breaking into the medical device world and realm required more than just those results. So I got my first real opportunity by working with a medical recruiter. And this is back in the day when you had to show up and be interviewed by the recruiter who understood what top tier performance really looked like and was willing to bet on mine. But I didn't wait around hoping to get noticed. I was super intentional. So I had a recruiter represent me. And, early on, I got game changing advice from my uncle, who at the time was president of Rayovac. And he told me, go out there and be the best of the best. You need to win Rookie of the Year, and you'll chart your own path. So that mindset became my playbook. And I learned that in this field, there are no shortcuts. You fail fast, you learn faster, and you earn trust every day. And that early experience taught me how to operate with a sense of urgency, how to perform under pressure, and how to build something long term. It didn't just open the door, it shaped ultimately the way that I lead today.
So it's a big transition and a big change to move from being an individual contributor that had performed at the level you'd performed at and then going into your first sales management job. Tell us about that. What was the transition like to move into being responsible for more than just yourself now?
Right. No, I remember when my mentor and leader at Medtronic told me, you're going to do this. It was very S1D1. I had always been an individual contributor and was happy and staying in my lane. And he said, nope, you can fish or you can teach people how to fish. And it's your time to teach people how to fish. So really everything changed because as an individual contributor, success was personal. The number was yours. You control the outcome. So when I stepped into leadership, that shifted overnight. It wasn't about my performance anymore. It was about how I was going to enable success for others. And I had to let go of that natural instinct to be the hero and focus instead on building a team of them. Not being the hero, but building a team of heroes, right? So that transition was humbling because you realize early that great leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about asking better questions, creating clarity, and really creating and protecting the conditions so that everyone on your team can thrive. I had to unlearn that reflex to jump in and solve everything and instead invest more in coaching, developing, and trusting the team. So you learn as a leader that results ultimately are going to come from trust and not from control. You cannot micromanage your way to excellence. What matters is creating a culture where people feel supported, where they feel empowered, challenged, and they know you believe in them. And I made it my job really to set the vision, ultimately clearing roadblocks and you have to have people's backs so that they could do their best work and grow in the process. And that's how you scale performance. That's how you build something that ultimately lasts.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely fantastic, and it makes me think. You do the hard work on the front end of hiring right,
Exactly.
so you can trust them, and then you trust them, which is also hard,
That's
but in a
right.
different way.
It is hard, but it's always the best approach.
Yes, absolutely. So you were working at, and you've worked at some very large companies, and then you decided to take a spin through startup world, and you've
Yes.
done it more than once. You've done it very successfully. Tell me about what people should appreciate about the differences between being at a big, very well known company that I also worked for, to going into startup land where nobody
Yeah,
knows your
that's a
name.
great question. And I get asked that a lot. So, with big companies, as you know, Jordan, they bring scale, they bring systems, they bring polish. You get access to resources, mature processes, and institutional knowledge that can elevate execution and rather rapidly. There's infrastructure to build on, and expectations are, for the most part, clear, you would hope, and it sharpens your operational discipline. Startups, on the other hand, they bring speed, they bring a little chaos and innovation, and that pace is unrelenting. So the roles are a little more fluid, and you're forced to make fast decisions with sometimes imperfect information and imperfect data. But that's also where some of the most creative thinking and personal growth happens, and professional growth. So you learn how to problem solve on the fly, stretch beyond your title, and you move without that safety net. So I love both for different reasons, and they each build different professional muscle. But the real magic is in blending the discipline of enterprise with the agility of a startup and knowing when to push structure and when to stay scrappy, because that combination can really create momentum most organizations never unlock. There was a saying that somebody told me early on, what gets in the way becomes the way. And I think that's sometimes what happens in large companies, but you are able to sort of break that down and build something when you're in a startup. Mm-hmm. So they're both fabulous and fun for different reasons, but they require different skill sets.
Yeah. What gets in the way becomes the way. Yeah, that's going to be a soundbite I'll use. I know it already. You seem to have such a well-defined leadership style, leadership philosophy. You know who you are, you know what you stand for, and you're grounded. How is that formed for you? Where did that come from?
I feel a little bit like sometimes your leadership style is forged and formed under pressure and when you have challenges in your professional career in some way, shape, and form, right? My philosophy is lead people, drive outcomes, never forget which comes first. I believe in transparency, accountability, and never asking something of someone that I wouldn't do myself. I think I mentioned that to you earlier. I have, if you allow me, I have sort of my 10 leadership pillars that I live by, and I think they're really integral and important to how I lead. And especially when I hire new team members, I'll go in and talk to new sales training classes, and I really want them to understand my philosophy and my pillars of leadership. So, first and foremost, I say it's about respect and responsibility. So leadership starts with respect, and not only for people's contributions, but for their voice, their perspective, and their safety, right? Their psychological safety. So when I believe as a leader, you build trust through consistency, through empathy and openness so that you can foster that psychological safety. And we're in individuals and reps or managers, leaders, when they feel empowered to speak up and innovate and challenge without fear of repercussions, that is really a healthy environment. And responsibility means, not just owning results, but the environment you create. And respect earns trust, and responsibility ultimately sustains it. So that's first and foremost. The second thing I would say is accountability and total business ownership. So true leaders don't throw anything over the fence. You don't pass the buck. You embrace extreme ownership. And you should do that at every level of the organization and seeing every win and loss as their own. And that pillar to me is really about aligning your personal success with the organization's success and modeling the behavior you expect from others. Next, I would say discipline yourself so that no one else has to. That's really, really important because discipline is that quiet muscle behind every major achievement. It's doing the right thing even when no one is watching. And leaders who hold themselves to a higher standard inspire others to do the same consistently, not occasionally. Next, I would say hard work is your passion. No one's ever going to outwork me. And hard work shouldn't feel like a punishment. It should feel like purpose. And passion really fuels perseverance. And when a leader genuinely enjoys putting in the work, that energy becomes contagious. And I think that ultimately fosters and drives a high performance culture. Next, I would say loyalty and integrity. And it's not just about being loyal to people, it's about being loyal to principles. And integrity means choosing what's right when it's not easy, because most of the time it's not easy. And it's how, as a leader, you earn that long-term credibility, even in the face of short-term crises and complications and sometimes costs. I'm also a big believer, Jordan, in rewarding and recognizing performance. So people are always going to repeat what's rewarded. And this pillar to me is about seeing people, appreciating their effort, and amplifying what works. Recognition is always going to build morale, and reward is always going to drive results. And so it's not just about compensation, it's about that whole culture of recognizing performance and rewarding it. And, everyone, the next pillar I would say is about coaching and developing your talent, because every strong leader is a force multiplier in your organization. So you don't just lead teams, you're ultimately responsible for building leaders. And coaching means investing time, giving feedback, and sometimes having those hard, crucial conversations. And your legacy isn't about your title, it's about the talent that you ultimately cultivate. Next, I would say being a fierce competitor, because we're in sales and competition is going to sharpen your saw. It's going to sharpen greatness. And whether it's market share or innovation, leaders ultimately are setting the tone for how fiercely and also ethically you fight. And being competitive means never settling or just the status quo or resting on your laurels. It's always pushing boundaries while staying true to your values. Then I would say handling success like failure. There's a quote I always say: sometimes you're on top, you stay humble, and sometimes you hit a low, you stay hopeful. So success can breed complacently, especially when people are used to winning. So leaders who treat triumph with humility and urgency are the ones who always stay hungry. And that mindset comes from never settling or coasting. You're constantly learning, evolving, and staying ahead. And then, finally, it's about really having that courage to continue. There'll be days when the climb feels steep and there's not a lot of applause or recognition, but courage means you press on, not blindly, but boldly. And it's the refusal to quit when things get uncomfortable, because it's what makes all the other pillars really matter.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Sounds like you've got a book inside of you somewhere. A lot of people would benefit. So a mutual friend of ours told me I should ask you a story about leadership during a hurricane or the immediate aftermath of a hurricane. Does that ring a bell with you?
Oh, yeah, it does. It definitely rings a bell. So Hurricane Maria, 2017 in Puerto Rico, we at Medtronic faced a really critical disruption because all of our manufacturing facilities were on that island for a variety of the different business units. And it was vital to the supply of our devices, and that was severely impacted. And the resulting product shortages in the middle of a launch, I would say, posed significant challenges, not just for, us as a company, but for patients, healthcare providers, and ultimately our reputation. And I think that really tested our leadership in mind in particular. And I think it probably provided several enduring lessons for all of us. And, it was about putting people first, because we had to prioritize our employees and the well-being of our employees in Puerto Rico first and foremost. So, providing the food, water, essentials, recognizing the caring for the people was foundational to our operational recovery, and building trust and loyalty, and just taking care of the people. We also had to communicate transparently and frequently, because in the time of a crisis, clear, honest, and regular communication is super essential. So as a leader, I had to keep employees, customers, and partners informed about the situation, what was going on with the recovery efforts, and all of the expected timelines. And I think that transparency really helped manage expectations and credibility, even when you have to deliver really difficult news, especially when patients and providers were waiting for product and we had shortages and delays and all sorts of challenges. So I, as a leader, had to really mobilize whatever resources we had rapidly, and making really quick, informed decisions, and demonstrating the value of adaptability and decisive action under pressure, and collaborating across all the various functions in the matrix, right? Because you have to work closely with supply chain and operations, customer service, marketing, to identify priorities and allocate whatever limited inventory that we had and provide solutions. And this kind of cross-functional collaboration ensured that our response was coordinated and ultimately customer focused, and staying true to the mission of Medtronic, alleviating pain, restoring health, and extending life. So, really, I would say inspiring teams, aligning actions, and reinforcing our purpose when you're in the middle of adversity. Also, you have to demonstrate resilience, but also maintain hope and optimism. And despite all of the challenges, maintaining a really positive outlook would ultimately encourage more resilience with the team. And I think that mindset really helps maintain and sustain morale and create problem solving throughout the crisis, and ultimately strengthen customer relationships, because, in a crisis, you have an opportunity to be really honest, really forthright, and deepen relationship with your customers through that honesty, the responsiveness, and the support that you provide. And we're working closely with our HCPs and the physicians and the surgeons to find alternate solutions, ultimately demonstrating our commitment and reliability. So, that was a really challenging time, but it underscored that effective crisis leadership hinges on, empathy and transparency and being agile. And I think those lessons remain highly relevant for any leader facing major disruptions or challenges. We faced something similar during COVID, right? And so that that collaboration is critical and key. And sometimes you don't know what's going to happen or how you're going to solve it, but you figure out a way through, a path forward.
Yeah, that's great. You touched on hope and optimism. And our friend, he said that during that time, he and other people on the team talked about it, and they just said, if Sara believes we can do it, we can do it. And they said every day she showed us that she believed we could do it, and we were going to make it through. So that was great situational leadership. What's a book, in your opinion, that every sales leader ought to read?
Yeah, so I have a lot of favorites, but probably my personal number one is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. She's got so many pearls of wisdom in that book. And what I like about it is that it's a masterclass in leading with vulnerability, courage, and heart, especially in high performance environments. And it changed how I give feedback, build culture, and ultimately develop leaders on my team. So the key takeaway is really about, I see you, I hear you, I don't have all the answers, but I'll keep listening and I'll keep asking questions. And you never have to do it perfectly, you just have to do it. And the other thing that I think is really important that the book demonstrates is that you have permission to speak up as a leader, even when you're not a content expert. And as a leader, you're not a map maker. You are traveling on the path with your team. So you need to have a goal. I know where I want us to go. You need to have a pathway. I know how we can get there. And you have to have the agency. I know we collectively can do this. So I think it's a perfect book, and it's helpful. You should read it and reread it and refer to it often. And it's definitely one of my favorites.
That's great. I'm adding it to my list right now mentally.
Right.
Who is a very valuable mentor for you? Because I feel like none of us get there by ourselves, or very few people do. Is there someone in particular, one or two people that you'd say these were mentors of mine? These people helped me.
Absolutely. When I think back to Medtronic, it was ultimately Brian Hussey. He was the one that tapped me on the shoulder and said, you're going to be a leader. And he was so supportive and I would say integral in my journey. At Exonics, it was Ray Cohen and Al Ford. At Nalu, it was Earl Fender and Ellen Meacham. And most recently at Mankind, without question, it was my COO, Lauren Sabella. And I've learned so much from them and all the various things that they've, passed on, because I've been fortunate to have these incredible mentors in the industry who have shaped not just my performance, but my perspective. So they've taught me that great leaders always invest in the people before the product. And it's the team that drives outcomes, not the other way around. And they all showed me that humility isn't a soft skill. It's ultimately your competitive advantage. So, be a leader who listens, stays grounded, and leads with trust and without ego. And one of the lessons that struck me early on, and Brian always used to say this to me, is your reputation will always travel faster than your resume. So it's how you show up when no one's watching that defines your leadership currency. And, that pushed me to stay sharp. And he always would talk about the 4 Ps, plan, prepare, practice, and perform. So plan meticulously, prepare thoroughly, practice like it's game day, and perform like it matters, because it always does. And probably the most powerful lesson was when someone reaches down to pull you up, you take their hand, but you always bring someone else with you, because that mindset really changed how I led. And it's not just about climbing, it's about building the ladders for others while you go. And that's how real impact compounds, through legacy, not just through your own accomplishments.
That's great. What would you say is the hardest lesson you've had to learn as a leader? How did it change you?
Probably that not everyone grows or wants to grow at the same pace. And leadership isn't about dragging people forward. It's about meeting them where they're at and recognizing their strengths, playing to their strengths, and helping them stretch from that foundation. And I think the biggest takeaway, the lessons you learn, is that leadership is not a popularity contest. Not everyone's going to like you. And that's not the job. The job isn't to make everyone like you, but they do need to respect you. And that respect comes from, consistency and clarity that I talked about, and follow through, and learning to communicate directly, giving honest feedback, and standing by your team, even when the decisions were hard. And a lot of times they are hard. And that balance of empathy and accountability is what ultimately, I think, turns you from a manager into a real leader.
Yeah. Years from now, when teams or customers speak about you, what do you hope they say?
That's a profound question. I hope they say that I led with clarity, conviction, and character. That over 3 decades now, I built more than just hiring teams. I built trust. That I never compromised on integrity, especially when it was inconvenient. And that I was the kind of leader who brought direction and complexity, steadiness when there was adversity, and consistency. And along the way, we laughed hard, we celebrated often, and had a lot of fun doing it. And it's been about forging friendships and trusted relationships that ultimately stand the test of time. And that would be legacy enough.
Yeah, I have a feeling they'll say all that, and they'll say a whole lot more. Very positive things. Sara, is there a piece of advice you give yourself often that you've had to learn the hard way?
Definitely. I would say it's slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And I had to learn that speed without precision can lead to rework. It can lead to misalignment and missed opportunities. So when you're in these high stakes environments, the instinct is to move really quickly. And that's the natural course of business. But the real progress comes when you pause with purpose. And I really encourage my teams to operate with intentionality, because before acting, you need to get really clear on your objectives. So aligning across the functions, pressure test your assumptions, and that front end discipline really creates cleaner execution and stronger outcomes and fewer course corrections later. It's not about hesitating, it's about decisiveness with clarity. And at the end of the day, the lesson is simple but powerful. Slow down to speed up.
Fantastic. That's so great. Measure twice, cut once, someone said.
That's right. I'd like to think I'm a resident expert on the subject, but it definitely helps to put some thought into it. Mm-hmm. But it's a fun subject to talk about, and it's definitely my passion. And like I said, I really appreciate the opportunity.
That's great. Sara, thank you so much for being on today and taking the time. You're someone that I've just really enjoyed working with over the years, and it's just absolutely delightful to have friends on this podcast and have so many people benefit from this. Thanks for listening to the Chase MedSearch podcast. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Be sure to visit our website at chasemedsearch.com and drop a resume. That way you never miss a job opportunity. And please subscribe to our YouTube platform, even if you like to consume the content in other ways. It really helps our algorithm, and we'd love to see you.